All right, welcome back to the Onebar and Lupagus show. I am Lupagus. I'm here with a very familiar face. We are Skoling with Professor Joe from the Cardinal Rule. Cardinals week this week. Professor, how the hell are you doing?
I'm doing really well, man. Enjoying the cooler weather. Not quite as cool as you all have up there, where you're at. But no, I'm having good week. Good Thanksgiving. Looking forward to the holidays. How about you?
I am doing just wonderful. Yes, it's like 19 degrees right now. We got snow last week. It's not even melting. It's staying already. So that's kind of a little early for that. But you know what? I'm all right. Let's talk about these Cardinals here. Again, I know a lot of you guys probably already have subscribed to the Cardinal Rule. If you haven't, be sure to do that. Not only just for the Cardinal news, but great draft information. You do that mock draft Monday. You guys are always talking about prospects. It's a great way to learn about some prospects. So you guys do a great job there. So definitely hit them up. Just for the draft coverage too.
Yeah,
just to harass them for the weekend.
Right.
All right. So you guys got off to a slow start this year, 2-4. Then you rattled off 4 straight. What was the change that kind of triggered that whole thing?
I would say there are two things. One, just simply the schedule. If you look at it, the Cardinals' first 6 games of the season were just brutal. Like Bills, Lions, who are looking like a juggernaut, right? So going into the season, we weren't surprised as Cardinals fans. We had been talking about first 6 games, really brutal, right? Really good teams. And the weak team in that 6-game stretch was the Commanders going into the season because we didn't know they would be as good as that, right? So when the game in that stretch is the weak link in that stretch is a team that ends up being really much better than expected, it's not surprising. In fact, the fact that they came out of that stretch 2-4 with close losses to the Bills and the Lions, I was actually quite encouraged coming out of that, right? I mean, you could have easily seen this team going, 1-5 or 0-6. So the pivot in the schedule to getting much easier was part of it, absolutely. And I think a second part, and this is going to be a continuing theme with this team, it's such a young roster, right? I mean, they're in a rebuild. Monty Ossenfort came in and really did a roster overhaul, lots of draft picks, right? They had not only good draft picks, in my opinion, but they had a lot of draft capital. If you've been following the Cardinals, like they did that trade back that added picks. So they're playing their rookies unlike previous regimes. So when you have a young roster, like every game is another bit of experience, as our coach says, time on task, right? So you've got guys who are rookies who were first-time NFL players who are now 6 games into the NFL career, and that matters for a rookie more than other players, right? Other veterans. So when you've got such a young roster, every game, those players are just getting a little bit better, right? So they had 6 games against really good teams, right, and played hard. And that time on task with those rookies and second-year players developing is a big part of that.
Nice. So, I mean, you guys are like scoring 30 points a week there. What the hell happened last week against the Seahawks? How do you only score 6 points?
So, a couple things. One, I mean, as you know, division rival games on the road are always tough, right? I mean, that's just sometimes you have those games, right? The weather was a little nasty, but that's not the big thing. Both teams had to deal with that. But of course, it was a low-scoring game on both sides. But really, the main thing is, Seattle did a great job with their defensive front. Their pass rush was relentless, right? They were really getting after Kyler, sacked him 5 times, and they were stymieing the run. Like the Cardinals, the thing they do best, the only thing they did well last year, they did one thing last year that they were good at, and that was running the ball, right? Everything else they sucked last year. This year, they've still been good running the ball, and they had less than 100 yards rushing total. That's including Kyler, right? You expect this team to get 150, pushing 200 yards on a good game between the running backs and Kyler Murray. They stymied the run, and they came with the pressure, and that was really the main thing that really affected this game.
You mentioned the young players, and your most shining young star right now, Marvin Harrison Jr. Your thoughts on him through the half the season so far?
He's had his lumps. Like he's had some plays where you see it, right? Just some amazing, toe tapping, toe dragging catches, some really huge plays on 4th down when they needed it. Just good jobs finding the open spots in the zone. So like you see the flashes. The consistency is the thing that's been missing. He's had a few, he's had a drop or two and a few other plays that weren't great or weren't like recorded as drops technically by the letter of the law, but where, maybe you would have liked and expected to see someone with his profile to go up and beat that player in the 50-50 ball. some games he seems to disappear. But he's a rookie. I think the expectations were super high because of everything they've said about him as this player is coming in pro ready. But I'm excited about the player. I've seen the flashes. I think he just needs to continue to build that consistency. I think this offense being a run heavy offense is part of the reason he's also kind of not been putting up the major numbers. But like, if you look at it, he's got a lot of touchdowns. It's just the yards and receptions where maybe you think he's underachieving. Or underachieving might not be the right word, but not meeting what the hopes that fans had for his first year. But, he's a rookie. You see the signs, you see the work ethic, you see everything you want there. I think as the rest of the offense develops and he develops, he's going to be a really nice player for us.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't you prefer Malik Neighbors?
I did not. Between Neighbors and Odunze, I liked Odunze, the big receiver, as the fit for their offense. Right. To me, it was Marvin Harrison Jr. Like, if they didn't trade back, if Marvin Harrison Jr. was the player, I would have them take ahead of anyone else. But I was okay with any of those three receivers. I liked them all. My thought process was, if they trade back to add draft capital between Neighbors and Odunze, I like the big receiver for their offense. I know Neighbors has been, a stud. I still like the big receivers, because if you look at what Kyler's doing with Trey McBride and what they're doing with this offense, he seems to like the previous regime had smaller receivers and that were trying to get open, in terms of creating steps of separation. But what we're seeing with Kyler is he's got this amazing touch that he actually does really well with those big targets. He gets it over, where only they can get it in very tight windows, and he does it really well. If you watch the games and look at what he's done with Trey McBride in particular, just some of those throws to that big target in really tight windows have been really impressive.
Nice. Well, thank you for correcting me on that.
Yes.
I knew there was another one you're into. All right. Is there a more underrated back in the league than James Conner?
It's hard to think of one, right? Though people are sure. The broadcasters talk about it, right? If you watch the games, they talk about how much they love him. I think, I think in the fan community out there, maybe people, certainly don't always think of him, first. But you look at he leads the league in broken tackles, right? Yeah. And you think of him as this big bruising back, which he is. But for over the last couple of years, he's been among the league leaders in big plays, right? Explosive plays, long runs, which you don't think of him that way. You don't think of he's not a burner, but he breaks those tackles and he turns what would be a 5-yard gain into a 15-yard gain or 20-yard gain because of what he can do with his vision and everything. So, he's getting later in his career. So, we want to enjoy while we can. He's approaching that 30-year mark, which is sort of this weird kind of, cliff for running backs. Cardinals fans love him, and rightfully so, because his play is great, but he is also he's just that kind of serious, quiet, intense veteran that you love having on this team that just does things the right way and is a great, presence in that locker room. Nice.
Again, here with Professor Joe from the Cardinal Rule. Go give them a sub. Again, not just great Cardinals information, but come draft day, you will not regret it one bit. Let's talk about your guys' defense. What do you guys do well on defense?
Not consistently rushing the passer. We have our games, but that's our biggest weak link is the pass rush. But this is such a cliche thing, but and I hate to say this phrase because every bad defense says this, but a bend but don't break defense. But the data and the numbers support that. They've given up a lot of yards, but and they've given a fair amount of points, but they're in a positive point differential now. And they do seem to give up yards, but when they get into that red zone, they kind of tighten down. So not, again, I know bad, bend but don't break as a phrase is a refuge of bad defenses. People like to say that, so they feel better about it. But this defense really seems to be that. And I think they're so young and they don't have a lot of blue chip players that you think of. Buda Baker is obviously a stud. I think there's some very, very underrated players on this defense that people are going to know about. And we'll talk about that probably in a little bit. But they do seem to be well coached, with Nick Rouse, who was from Philadelphia, came with Jonathan Gannon. So they seem to be well coached and playing within that system. And even though they have a lot of young players and a lot of players that people outside of Arizona don't know their names, they've raised the floor and they've gotten better over the course of the season. If you look at the metrics and the data, they don't rate as a good defense like on paper right now, but they were like bottom 2 or 3 for the first 6 or 7 games of the season in that tough stretch. And they've crept up. And if you look at their last, 6 or 7 games, like they've had a few bad games, but they've really done a good job of stymieing some offenses.
I didn't send you the questions ahead of time, and you said we'll talk about that later. We were talking about underrated players. That was my next question. So
what can I say? I do this a bit, don't I?
Yeah. Again, you can be unhumble again if you want. All right. So, who are some of these under the radar players? Maybe some guys who just aren't getting any kind of media, nationwide attention. But you Cardinal fans know they're fantastic.
Well, the first and foremost, there's one player on this defense that if you don't know who he is, you will, because he has been outstanding. That is cornerback Garrett Williams. He was a 3rd-round pick last year, not this draft, but the draft before, the first draft under Monty Ossenfort out of Syracuse. He was a 3rd-round pick because he was recovering from an injury, and he didn't play until like partway into the season. So those kinds of players who would have been a late first rounder, early second rounder, often slide at round 3. His PFF grade of 78.4 is the 7th highest amongst cornerbacks. So he's the 7th highest graded cornerback, and there are some other advanced metrics where he's like within the top 3 in terms of limiting quarterbacks. This guy has been quietly, a really, really good cornerback who he's their slot cornerback. A lot of fans wonder why they don't put him outside. I'm going to trust the coaching staff. I think he's probably, there's some things you do in the slot, need to do in the slot that apparently he probably does really well. He's one of those players that's going to be a Pro Bowler, in my opinion, sooner rather than later. Another player is someone we signed as a free agent who's a linebacker for us, Mac Wilson Sr. He was with the Patriots, former 5th-round pick out of Alabama. In that inside linebacker position, he's just been a nice stabilizing force. He's graded 67.4, which is solid. So he is a really, really nice player for them on the defense. Everyone knows Budda Baker. And I'm going to throw another name out there who's not a Pro Bowl caliber player, but like he's exceeding, expectations based on his kind of, the fact that he was an undrafted free agent. And that's Starling Thomas, the 5th. He's a cornerback out of University of Alabama, Birmingham. He was 2023, went undrafted. His PFF grade is like 59.8, which is like right at 60 is average. So he's not like a stud, but like this is an undrafted free agent who came in and is starting right on the outside cornerback. So and he doesn't make big plays, but he doesn't make the really, really bad plays either. He's just very steady. And he's been a nice piece as well.
Nice. How about a player who goes out there and you just cringe like, oh God, there we go again.
that one is easy, and it's sad because he was one of our top free agents, like Sean Murphy Bunting, the other quarterback. Okay. Former 2nd-round pick, with the Buccaneers. He's, been around a little bit, and, his PFF grade, is 52.9, which isn't great. And he's just had a lot of bad games. And, when you have a team that drafted 3 cornerbacks, including, the guy out of Rutgers that they drafted in the 2nd round, Max Melton, who, when you draft a guy in the 2nd round, you want him to become ideally your cornerback 1, right? So people have seen Murphy Bunting just get beat and have bad game after bad game. He's gotten a little bit better as the season's gone on. When you've got this 2nd-round pick that fans like, why aren't we playing him more consistently? He's going to be the guy that.
Yeah. So, all right. Good. All right. So how did the Cardinals go to Minnesota, US Bank Stadium, and beat the Vikings on Sunday?
I mean, listen, the Vikings are favored as they should be. But this Cardinals team, I think, has exceeded expectations. They're in year 2 of a rebuild. I think if you told fans that we'd be 6-5 at this point, Cardinals fans, we would all have taken that, with this. But I'll tell you what, like, yeah, we're coming off a really bad loss on the road against Seattle. But if you look at the Cardinals' schedule, right, and you look at their losses, okay, their losses have been against the Bills, the Lions, the Commanders, the Packers, and then now the Seahawks, right? Every one of those teams, with the exception of the Seahawks, is like an elite, top 5 to 7 NFL team, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like at this point. And the Seahawks are kind of in that middle of the pack like the Cardinals, but it's a division rival and it was a game on the road, right? So there's no shame in that loss, right? So like those are the losses. Like the Cardinals haven't lost to a bad team, right? Mm-hmm. And when you look at all the teams that are in the middle of the pack or bad, with the exception of the Seahawks, we've beat them all, right? The Chargers are a good team. We beat them. The Bears, they had a rough week, right? The Dolphins, right? The Jets, we beat the 49ers and the Rams both once, right? So this Cardinals team, as much as that 6-5 record is a pleasant surprise, I think they're better than even that record shows when you look at that. Like they've lost to good teams, lost to one middle of the pack team, but every other team has been really good. And they, aside from the Seahawks, consistently beaten those middle of the pack teams, that tells me the Cardinals should, at least at this point, I think they're near the top of the middle of the pack. So now the Vikings come in as a good team, right? Who, well, I think, and I want to ask you in a second how you feel about Sam Darnold, because that's been really nice surprise how well he's played in the system. But like, this is a good team, and the Cardinals, I think this team, Seattle's, with what they did with the pass rush, was really a tough matchup for the Cardinals. I think the Cardinals do better in coverage than they do in pass rush themselves. And if they can if Kyler has time, I think they can run with anyone, have a chance to at least, right? Mm-hmm. So I think the Vikings are favored, but this would be a really nice test for the Cardinals. If they can go into Minnesota and beat one of these really good teams, that's that next step for the Cardinals, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to sit here and pick the Cardinals as some naive fan, but I think they absolutely have a chance. They come in there, if their defense does what they've been able to do in recent weeks of kind of stymie your offense a little bit, or at least kind of slow it down, and then the Cardinals play a run control, ball control, running have offense. They keep their defense off the field. That's part of their strategy too. And they get a few big plays, they could absolutely come in there and upset you all. So I think that's absolutely a possibility.
Yeah, they're definitely the best team we've played in 3 weeks. So no doubt about that. Sam Darnold, how I feel about Sam Darnold? Thank you for the question, Professor. Yeah, I mean, we love him overall. I mean, he's had just some amazing throws that just make you say, wow. His ability to escape pressure looks like he's going down. Somehow he gets out of it and he runs. He either makes a great throw on the run or he scampers for a first down. We haven't had that with Kirk Cousins. But then there's the ugly side of things. Like, I mean, you see the red zone interception. Some of these decisions he makes, like, what the hell are you thinking? Like, forcing the ball to Justin Jefferson when you got Aaron Jones wide open in the flats. You see some of those. The last couple of weeks, he's kind of avoided that. But, Jacksonville, he had 3 red zone turnovers. He almost lose to that shit team just because of how bad he was. So he's been good lately. And when he's on, he's on. But when bad Sam Darnold comes out, that's not.
So I have two thoughts on that. One, it does more than anything really reinforce to me like how important situation is for quarterbacks, because like even though he has that good and bad side, like if you look at his stats, like 21 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, like, and what he's done throughout his career, like that's a major improvement for him. And he's always been in bad situations before. Now he comes into it with a good offense, good receivers, and good coach with a good system. So just as a general commentary, I think that's really speaks a lot how much situation, like, because he was drafted early for a reason, and he's stuck, even though he's been a bust, he's stuck around for a reason. Like Josh Rosen isn't still around, right? Sam Darnold is. So people in the building have seen something, and now he's in the good system. But when you describe that good and bad, it does remind me of another quarterback who has statistically had good seasons, but is not starting for a reason. It reminds me of Carson Wentz a little bit. Yeah. Right. Guy who does things well. And if you just look at his stats, he's had years that you're like, why is this guy not a starting quarterback? But then when you watch the games and see some of the mistakes, right? Like you're saying with
Darnold.
Yes, Darnold. Sorry, yeah, brain fart. So anyway, yeah, I think that's interesting. But yeah, it's been really kind of neat to see his sort of resurgence with the Vikings.
Yeah. All right. Well, one more for you, Professor Joe. Thank you for coming on. This is like the sixth time I think you've been on our show. You might have the record, so well done.
Nice
on that. Well done. I know you've been on a couple draft shows of ours too. All right. So you said you think the Cardinals can win this game. Will they? How do you see this thing panning out?
Oh man! So if I'm being objective, like pure probabilities, Vikings should win. It's a home game. They have a better record. They've been better overall, right? So if you're asking me to be just completely objective, I would have to pick the Vikings. But I do believe in what this coaching staff is doing. I believe this defense is getting better. So, the fan in me wants to pick the Cardinals, but objectively speaking, I gotta say the Vikings have a chance to win. But I think I'm hoping at least the Cardinals are going to come in and y'all are going to be like, okay, this team is better than people thought. Watch them get blown out again. Oh man.
I respect the Cardinals. I'm watching what they do, and when they were 2-4, I thought something different. But when they rattled off that win streak, okay, the Cardinals are they might be a team here. So, all right, I like it. Again, Professor Joe, happy Thanksgiving. Thanks for coming on. We appreciate it very much. Everybody, go give the Cardinal Rule a sub. Follow on Twitter, too. Awesome. We really appreciate it very much. And keep your skull in your hole.
Of course.